about Schaeferstown growing up, early childhood into Great Depression, just the way the town was?
I only moved into the Shaverstown area in 1942.
Oh, okay.
So before that, I lived over in Marshtown and Mount Edna area.
Mhm.
That's where I grew up. But I know something of what they talked about, in Shaverstown and so forth. I mean,
Mhm.
since I'm here, I learned a lot, of course.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, then, how was the area you grew up in then, near Mount Etna?
the area, I don't know how to explain that. I guess like any small community
Mm-hmm.
was at that time. So
Okay.
I know that growing up, of course, when the war started, how things were. When Russian took over and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and when I grew up, when I, I was growing up in the Great Depression, so we didn't have an awful lot. I lived without electricity when I was in my lower years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't know when we would have first had electricity. I lived out in the. I started in a one-room schoolhouse in Jacksonville. You know where Jacksonville?
I've heard of it.
North of Little Kutztown.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. That's a Jacksonville Grange, and there was a one-room schoolhouse there, and I started first grade in that area. So we lived out there till I was about sixth or seventh grade, and I moved to Mount Edna.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived there a couple of years. And my dad worked at the ore mine, so we moved to Buffalo Springs in 1942.
Okay. So then, when you did move to Schaeferstown, then into your high school years, what was it like going to high school here in town? Just like classmates you went to school with, school friends.
The classes were very small at that time. Uh, there was only 4 boys in my class in Shaverstown, and 16 girls. There was 20 students in my class in school,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the boys were called into the service before they graduated.
Mm-hmm.
I was the only boy left for graduation.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
I knew it would have been pretty thin by that point.
Right, yeah.
But yeah.
And I already had my draft notice at that time, but I went from a physical and had passed my physical, I believe, before I finished school. And I passed that, so I was ready to be called any time, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't call me then for 3 months, and then when they did call me, uh, my 90 days had passed, and I had to come home again and get more blood work for 3 days because
Mm-hmm.
the 90 days had run out of my physical.
Oh, yeah.
So
you had to redo that.
So that I didn't go with the normal group that was called up
Mm-hmm.
those 3 days. I got separated from the gang that I knew here in town. So
Okay, yeah.
I went back 3 days later or so.
Mm-hmm. So when you were drafted and received your notice, like, how did you feel when you received that? Were you expecting it?
Yes, I was
Ready for
expecting it, and I was ready to go. In fact, I was thinking about enlisting in the Air Corps.
Mm-hmm.
Another boy from Shaverstown had decided to go, and we got our parents' signature to go, and I had passed and said I was eligible, and he didn't go, and I didn't go, so I just sort of hesitated and didn't go, and but in the meantime, I was drafted.
Okay. So then, after you were drafted, and then after your graduation too, when I guess you were inducted into the Army. Where did you go for that? Were you
to Harrisburg.
to the Cumberland Army Depot?
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
That's where I was. We were inducted in Harrisburg, and then after you were inducted, it took us by bus, I guess, out to New Cumberland, and from there we got our orders and were equipped with uniforms and so forth and necessities. And
so when you were going through that whole process, was it really starting to become real for you? Like,
oh yes,
what was going on?
yes,
Everything was sinking in.
Yes, yes. We did a lot of thinking in that time, and in a lot of, I guess, worrying about going into action, and so forth.
Yeah. So to backtrack a little bit to when World War II broke out for America with Pearl Harbor.
Right.
What was the atmosphere in town like? And even before that, would you say the majority of people around here expected us to become involved in the war eventually?
I think so at that time, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And especially when they bombed Pearl Harbor, then you knew you were in it.
Yeah. Okay.
But in the meantime, there was a lot of negotiating between, over in England and the president, Churchill, and they did a lot of negotiating. I think they were preparing for war to help out.
So at that time, with people expecting the war to break out, and then when the war broke out for us with Pearl Harbor, I guess what I want to ask you is, did you notice any atmospheric changes? Like if there was anyone who was against the war at all, who was known to be against the war, were opinions changed, or was everyone pretty much on board from the go?
I think everybody was on board from the go, because it was more or less, we didn't go into their war, that we were sort of invaded. We were drawn into it, and everybody was ready to help. I mean, that's when the war bonds came out and all kinds of savings. I know that the school used to collect tin cans and buying war bonds, and getting ready for war.
So to wrap up the few questions I have with the beginning of the war and then pre-war things from around here, do you remember anyone in particular, or anyone who had hard feelings against people who were considered draft dodgers, or people who wanted to avoid going into service?
Everybody, I think, was against what they called draft dodgers. I mean, you heard, especially there were people, of course, and you would expect that, people that were getting jobs on farms.
Yep.
And drafting, and then there were those that were, they called conscientious objectors. Religious, got out for religious purposes. They went into conscientious objectors camps. So I know some of those people, and the feeling towards those people, I guess I wouldn't have wanted to be one at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So when you began your basic training, what did you think of your fellow trainees, your drill instructors? I guess the whole experience. How did it really affect you?
The drill inspectors were really tough on you, and they were tough on you for one reason. They wanted to toughen you up and get you excited to defeat the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
They did anything they could to, I would say, on purpose to try and get you PO'd.
What do you remember specifically from your training, like several of the things you had to do in regards to like physical fitness, weapons training,
Yeah,
basic infantry skills?
they had what they call an obstacle course, where you had to crawl under barbed wire with your rifle, and crawling under the barbed wire. And while you were crawling under that barbed wire, they were shooting uh, uh, ammunition over your head,
Mm-hmm.
tracer bullets from machine guns. If you stood up, that would have been curtain. So that was tough. And when you came out the other end of, I was in Florida, of course, and that's a sandy subject, and it had been raining the day before. And when you came out from the obstacle course, they checked your rifle to see that they were clean.
Mm-hmm. So you'd said you were in Florida for basic training. Do you remember the name of the camp or the base that you were at for training?
It was Camp Landing, Florida, and that was what they called an ROTC.
Okay.
Infantry Replenishing, IRTC,
Mm-hmm.
Infantry Replacement Training Center.
Okay, yeah. So you said it was Camp Landing?
Camp Landing.
Landing?
Yep, BLANDING.
Landing, okay. So you mentioned being around sand. Were you training at all for amphibious operations? Like, were you expecting from any of your training that you might be sent to the Pacific before being sent to Europe?
No.
So you expected from the start that you'd be going to Europe to fight?
No, I didn't really think of that, because I think some of them, I'm sure, not all of us went to Europe from Landing, wherever they needed them.
Okay.
And we were always glad that we didn't go to the Pacific, because we heard rumors of, though they didn't give up.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Germans were ready to give up if they were cornered, and we had a lot of that. So I was lucky to be in. I always thought I was lucky to be over in Europe.
So once you'd completed basic training, I remember before you had said about your training being rushed due to the need of replacements after the Battle of the Bulge. Could you go through that experience when your training was cut short?
We were in what would 17-week basic training. That was what a course would have been. We were in the 15th week, and that particular week we were out on bivouac. We weren't in the camp at all. We lived in tents or in foxholes out and did all our training out. Never got into a building for the whole week. On Saturday morning, we were scheduled for a 25 march, full field pack, 25 march back into camp. That was the big thing, and everybody was dreading that, because that's a lot of walking to do with a full field pack. And on Friday night, they said, everybody tear down and put on the full field pack and get ready to pull out. Well, everybody thought, here's another one of their tactics, trying to, get you all upset and mad. And so we didn't know what was going on, and we got our packs torn down and full field pack, and got ready to go and lined up to ship out. And here come big trucks come out and picked us up and took us into camp. And he said, "You're finished with your basic training. You're going to be going into action." So our basic training was over. But that happened rather sudden, so you didn't have too much time to think about it. So,
yeah, it's such a surprise that you don't.
So now things are getting pretty serious, And that's when you did a lot of thinking about, well, this is it for me. I guess that's the end of my career. All of the years I was shipped overseas, thinking this is the one-way trip. You know, you just have that feeling, but and things weren't too nice at that time, of course. But.
Mm-hmm. So with the voyage to Europe, while you were thinking about that, what was it like going to sea like that? Was that your first time on a boat or anything like that size? Yeah.
That was the first time on there. And we were issued new rifles, and they were brand new, and they were packed in cosmoline, as they call it. It was a material. It was a sticky material, and there's not a good way to clean it. You should have some kind of solvent to get it out. But they said clean your rifle because this is your rifle. You're going overseas, so all we had was hot water and cleaning supplies, and we made sure that they were good and clean because they said that's going to be your weapon and your buddy from the rest of the war. So, and it was so.
Yeah. So again, while you were on the boats, you mentioned cleaning the new weapons that you'd received and anything. Which rifle were you issued at the time?
The M1. Yeah.
Okay. And also, besides doing that, what else did you do to pass time on your trip over to Europe?
I had a friend that I sat with, and a lot of times we'd sit out on the deck during the night and just talk to each other. And I don't know what became of him, and I wouldn't know his name if I had to depend on it. I just don't remember him, but I just remember that two of us would sit out, and a lot of people got seasick on the boat, and we had one man they had to carry off. He was so seasick all the way over, never ate anything.
Wow.
And we were on the ship about 7 days.
Okay. So you said about spending the time above deck. How bad was it to be below deck? Because I've heard it was not an enjoyable experience.
Well, there you felt the motion of the ship, and you didn't have the fresh air to breathe. And there were really tight quarters. They had like hammocks, and if you were in one of the lower ones, when the guy above turned, you could feel him sort of squeezing against you. You had to sort of squeeze into sleep. So rather than sleep, lots of times we were on the deck and were more comfortable.
Yeah. From there, once your voyage was over, going to Europe, did you stop in England first, or did you?
Yes, we landed in England.
So you land. Where did you land in England?
Liverpool, England.
And then from your time in Liverpool, how much time did you spend there before being shipped over to the mainland?
Well, we went straight across. We were only there, maybe a couple of days. Those times I just don't remember too much of, but until we crossed the English Channel and into Le Havre, France.
Okay. And then from Le Havre,
there we were picked up with trucks.
Okay.
And taken out into different areas of the front lines.
So
I probably never saw any of the men that went across with me after that. I mean, I was taken into a certain area in the middle of the night at 10 o'clock at night in December, and it was cold, I know that. And we walked into an area, a forest area, and we come upon a foxhole, and he said, "This is going to be your foxhole, buddy." He said, "You're in the services," and he said, "I'll have a man here for your replacement," he said.
So when you did arrive with your assigned unit then, which company were you assigned with? I remember you were 18th Regiment of the 1st Division.
Company G of the 1st Division.
Okay. Prior to reaching that unit you were assigned to when you were passing through France, moving towards the front. Did you remember seeing any wreckage or destroyed towns from previous fighting that occurred
No,
before you were there, or?
I didn't see too much of that. We did a whole lot of traveling at night to begin with, and I didn't see any destruction at that point. England, I guess, had pretty much. They had what they call the bus bomb. I heard one of those going over one evening, coming in. It didn't get close to us, but we could heard it going over. So.
You just mentioned the buzz bomb, and not being too worried about it because you heard it go over, but still, it's not
We knew
reassuring
what it
sound
was.
to hear that.
That's what they were doing to attack England,
Mm-hmm.
Germany, and they were living in fear all the time with that bus bomb. They never knew where it was going to go because they didn't have too much control. I guess they had only distance. They set it in the distance, and when it ran out of fuel, that's where it went down.
Yeah, and it just
So after that, I don't think they had the equipment that they could direct like they can to rockets today. So
yeah, with that experience and knowing the Germans had weaponry like that, did that concern you that the Germans might have had better weaponry than the army did that you were fighting for?
I didn't think so. No, because that bus bomb didn't impress me too much. It really sounded. I don't know whether you ever heard of the Maytag washing machines when they first came out. It sounded like that motor sounded like a putt motor. It didn't sound like anything really fatal. I don't know what it was when it landed. I have no idea. I never got into that.
So then, going back to being assigned to your new unit, and you said you'd moved in and been assigned during the night. What was it like during that first day or first few days, getting to know the guys in your unit or your non-coms?
Young at that time, 18 years old, and I was scared. And we go in this fence, like I told you, and he said, you're gonna join up to someone here, and he's in the foxhole. And when we got close to that, he called out, and he said, "Halt! Who goes there?"
Mm-hmm.
And on the way out, the fellow that took me in, I said, "What do we do now? Now that we're here, what do I have to do?" "Well, you'll find out." He said, "You'll be hooked up with somebody with experience." He said, "And he'll let you know what to do." Mm-hmm. So, like I said, they said, "Halt! Who goes there?" We gave him a password, and I believe the password that night was Purple Car.
Purple Cow, like caw, like a bird?
C-O-W.
Oh, Purple Cow. Okay, cow. Yeah.
And of course, the fellow that took me out knew he had to know that so that we wouldn't be attacked. If we'd have probably been shot on sight if we had known it. Anyways, he introduced me, said, here's a replacement, and he's going to be with you. He's going to be your foxhole buddy. You take care of him. And when I got into him, I asked him, I said, "I'm new here. I don't know what to do." I said, "What do we do now?" He said, "I don't know too much." He said, "Yesterday was my first day." But he was a very nice fellow, a fellow from New York. He was a couple of years older than I was, and he took care of me like a son. I mean, I felt almost like being with my father, taking care of me. He said, "You sleep, you take care. I'll watch guard the rest of the night." In a foxhole, and it was cold and miserable, snow. Wasn't too nice, but he took care of me. So.
Mm-hmm. With the cold, were there any tricks, suggestions that the guys that were there from before that suggested trying to get gloves, extra socks?
No, there was nothing like that. at all. When we were issued some supplies, one of the things they gave was a little can that was about 2 inches square, I would say, and that was dynamite, they said. And they gave us a fuse, and the idea behind that was if we had a retreat in a forest, we would put it on the side of a tree and blow the trees over to block the roads. And the first foxhole we had to dig was so hard, all we had was our little shovel and the pick, and we couldn't get through, so we used the dynamite to break the crust on there. And that's the last I ever had of that, so we never had any more of that. And it was never used that I know
of. So you mentioned the little can of TNT being issued out to you when you were on the front. What other equipment do you remember carrying with you besides like your rifle, your field pack, your helmet?
A bandolier of ammunition and a belt with an ammunition with there was some ammunition in that, and also your canteen was on the belt, the water canteen. So, and then my friend, my foxhole buddy, and I were given a bazooka, and he carried the bazooka. That comes in 2 sections, and I carried the rounds for that. And there were 6 rounds of that, and I would say they weighed about 12 pounds. So that was a heavy pack to carry along in the action. And I know that when we crossed the Siegfried line, we had to get rid of it. We couldn't use it anymore.
So you mentioned to me before about ditching the bazooka. Could you go through that story about trying to engage a?
Well,
if I remember correctly, you mentioned trying to engage a sniper, and it wouldn't work well for you.
He assembled it, the 2 halves, and put it together. And my job was, with the ammunition, was to load it and hook it up. There was a wire you had to hook up, and there was battery operated, and it flicked a spark that sent it rocket out. When he first said, I said, "You're ready to go," and he pulled the trigger. He said, "You don't have it hooked up?" I said, "Yeah, I do," because we had that in basic training, so I knew how to. It was simple. It was nothing to it. And he pulled again. He said, "No, you don't. There's something wrong. You don't have it hooked up." I said, I checked it, double checked it. I said, "Perfect." I said, "It's hooked up. Everything's right." Pulled again a couple of times. So he's looking down and pulling the trigger at the same time, and it went off. And we were aiming at a house across a field because there was somebody in that house shooting out of the window at us. We were in a hedgerow, and when he did that, it went completely over the top of the house and never even got close to it. That was the only shot we ever shot, because from there on we advanced and took that guy prisoner, and there was not too much problem there anyways.
So you mentioned taking the guy that was shooting at you from the house. You mentioned taking him prisoner. When you took this prisoner, I guess came into contact with any other Germans in your time in the field, what was your first impression of them, or what were your thoughts prior and then compared to them when you actually got to see them up close?
Well, I guess I almost pitied them rather than. Of course, you were trained to hate and to kill if you had to, but we were told to take prisoners whenever possible. And when we got him, I didn't get in too much contact with him. Usually, the sergeant in our squad, he took him in and they sent him back. You never get to see him again, but once in a while you'd ask him a question. Maybe when I got to see him, and talking Pennsylvania Dutch, I could understand a few words of theirs and get something out of their conversation. And they could understand me.
So you just mentioned that speaking Pennsylvania Dutch to them. Do you remember anything that you were asked when you were talking to them, and if they were surprised to
The only thing
have a
is,
GI somewhat speak German to them?
They asked me to ask the one fellow that we took a prisoner. He'd come down a fence row, and they said, ask him whether there's any more out there. And I said, ask him whether there were any more prisoners out there. And he said, he answered yeah, and asked her, he said 17. And they gave him his rifle back and told him to go out and bring him in.
Mm-hmm.
And he did that, and he brought him in, and there was no shots fired. Right? That was during the end of the war,
Mm-hmm.
when they were giving up. They were wholesale. They were happy to give up, because they had no organization anymore.
So for the time that you were in combat, you said you made it to the front line and assigned your unit in December, and
would have been January.
by January at that point. January
by the middle of January is when I got to the front lines.
Okay.
Because we were in Blanding, Florida in December, and when we got home, they sent us home, and we had a 4-day delay in Rod where we could go home. And I got home the day after Christmas and had to leave again the day before New Year. So then we went to New York, and that's where I got on the ship, and we were sent to overseas on the.
So you said you had the delay before shipping out, and you got to visit home. What was it like visiting home right before leaving? How was that for you?
Very exciting and a happy reunion, but sort of sad in the fact that you knew now you were going into the war, getting into the active war. So, of course, you're nervous and scared, but you were young, and you could at those times you could take more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So then, back to when you were in Europe, when you reached the front line, you mentioned you landed in Le Havre in France. So when you reached the front line, do you know if you were in Belgium at that time? In Belgium? And then from Belgium, you moved into Germany. Do you remember any town names at all?
I never knew where I was almost from the time. They'd tell you nothing. Yeah. I was a peon. Only guy that knew anything in our whole squad was the sergeant of the squad leader. He was a sergeant, and they would tell him what action you're going to do, and you didn't know what you were going to do that night. One night we were marching all night, and we didn't know where we were going, what we were going to do. They didn't know the name of the towns. When we took a town, we just went in the morning, and usually we would attack mostly in the early morning at daybreak. So,
yeah,
as I can remember, yeah.
So, with at least one, if not the two other regiments in the 1st Infantry Division at this time, or not specifically at this time, but in the beginning of March, if I remember correctly, when they crossed at Remagen with the bridgehead. Do you remember being in that area or crossing the river?
We crossed right into Bonn. There was one. There was the last bridge that was standing, but they wouldn't let us cross the bridge because they knew they were all the bridges were bombed, and they were waiting to blow them up when the troops were on. And I guess they were pretty successful in some of the other bridges, but that bridge we just decided not to go on.
So, not being able to cross that bridge, you have to wait for engineers to construct a bridge.
No, we went across on duck boats.
Okay.
Where they dropped the front end. You could drop it down, and you could walk off of them on the other side.
So when you did cross the river on the landing craft, were you issued out a life belt, or anything?
No,
Just your
nothing,
normal combat gear to go across?
Nothing. And I think we could get in where they could land it, put the front end down on land and never got wet. I think we just walked right off over there. This I can remember now. So there's a lot of things you don't remember, and there's some things you'll never forget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was that like then, crossing the river? Were you contested at all by the Germans? Did they put up any resistance?
Not at that point, no.
Okay.
No, we walked right in.
What did you think, just personally, of being on those landing craft and knowing that they were used elsewhere, like D-Day and in the Pacific? Like,
I never thought too much of that, but you were scared, like you were saying. What are you going to meet? Mm-hmm. You'd be standing ducks out there if they were set up for you. Mm-hmm. It was like landing on D-Day on the beach. I often think of that. The poor guys that had to go in there, they had no chance and no place and no rocks to hide behind or anything else, you know.
So speaking of those, the GIs that did land at D-Day, was there anyone in your company that you knew of that was around at D-Day, or that everyone knew after that had not landed at D-Day?
See, to begin with, when I was called in, when we were down in Florida, they had the Battle of the Bulge, and they lost so many men, and when we got there, what used to be a 12-man squad had 4 men in it. So I filled a squad, or helped to fill a squad that had only had 4 men in it at the time. And so there's not too many guys there that would have had the full Tommy. Mm-hmm. That I don't know whether they did or not. We never discussed that to begin with. Mm-hmm. I know in my direct, the guy was, well, like I said, it was his first day, the day before I came, my foxhole buddy. Mm-hmm. And that's the only guy I got to know in the whole squad. You see him, and maybe I knew a couple of names at the time. I had a long time forgotten. Mm-hmm. I only know two men's name in my whole outfit. Was my foxhole buddy and a guy by the name of McConley.
What was
they said he got killed the same day I got wounded. I never saw him and never heard anything anymore. They just came in during the night when I was waiting to be evacuated. They said McConley was killed.
So you mentioned his name was McConley, and your foxhole buddy. What was his name?
His name was Joseph Seba. He was from New York. He said he was from Buffalo, New York. But I tried to enter his name in the computer, and it leads me to the point where you have to sign up, and I never did that. I don't have that in the computer, so I never found out how he made. The reason I don't know anything about him anymore because he got wounded about 2 weeks before I did. So I was alone. I had no foxhole buddy after that. I was on my own, so he was not seriously wounded, I don't think. Mm-hmm. He was just in his foot, and Peter shrapnel went through his shoe, and they took him back, so I never saw him again. Never got to talk to him again. So,
just for my notes, how would you spell his last name?
Sepi or Zepi. I'm not sure. I put it into the computer both ways, and all I knew was he lived in Buffalo, New York, and he lived in house number 11. He said so.
So you said when he was wounded, that you didn't know anyone else in your squad then at that time. Was your squad once again under strength with him being wounded and possibly others being wounded around the time?
As I would know it, it would have been up to that time. It would have been only the two of us, because we had no casualties from the time I got in that I know of until the day that I got wounded. Because most of the time it was you'd march into a town and just take all the prisoners, but that was the end of the war for them.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they decided one last stand, let's get set at this town that we went into, and they had machine guns set up for us. We had to cross open fields. They had machine guns set up, machine gun fire, and they had artillery of some kind when we got in there, because they knew which houses we were going to go into and where we were going to be, and they had everything zeroed in, and they were dug in pretty hard to try and save that one of the last towns. So that was March the 24th, and as you know, by May it was all over there. So,
Mm-hmm. So when you're,
I think they said we were about 45 miles from Berlin when I got wounded.
so that attack when you were wounded, when your outfit pushed on that town, can you describe what it was like stepping off the attack and then getting into the town?
I remember very much. We came into a little farmhouse, and there was a barn, and we were behind the barn, and when you went on the other side of the barn, there was an open field, and you could see the outline of the town. Now they said, we're going to get across here. We're all going to go at one time, and if you get lost over there, we meet at a civilian hospital over there. That's where we're going to get together for our future orders of how we're going to get. So you had to go across that open field. Well, to begin with, first of all, about I'd say 100 yards out in the middle of the field, there was a foxhole, and there was a German in there, and every now and then he'd pop up, and before we took off, he would fire at us. And we had one man that says, cover me, I'll take care of him. You pin him down, keep shooting across his foxhole, and don't let him pop up. And he went out and came in from the side, and when he got in so close, we stopped firing. He said he made motions to stop, and when he did, the German gave up. I don't like to say this too much, but what happened was, and I don't know whether you want to ever print this or not, instead of taking prisoner, he said, no, you don't. Shot him. And you know what? He turned around to walk back to us, and he didn't walk 10 steps until, boom, he fell straight down. A sniper someplace saw him and shot him, got him killed. Mm-hmm. So if he'd have done what we were told to do, you do not kill people, you take them prisoners.
Yeah.
He would have never been shot. So
mm-hmm.
He was a hero, and yet he made a mistake.
Yeah.
You say so. I don't usually like to say anything because of his reputation, but I didn't know him anyway. I don't know whether he was even from my same regiment. I would imagine it was the regiment, but not
the same
I didn't
company.
know him. I didn't know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But then we had to cross it, and we all said, everybody, charge, and we go out there. And when we did, they opened fire with machine guns
mm-hmm.
from both sides.
Yeah.
And halfway across, I saw a crater, a bomb crater, and I dove in there because we had a long ways to go yet, and they were firing. And I went in there for protection. There was another man in there, and every now and then I'd hear a bullet hitting in the ground close. I said, we're sticking out. I said, I'm going to go. The other guy said, no, he's going to stay. And I went. Now I'm the only guy on the field that I could see. And as I go by, I saw the machine gun fire, the dirt flying at my feet. I never got hit.
Mm-hmm.
and I dove into the first house that I could get into for protection, and that's where I got wounded in that house.
Mm-hmm.
They had artillery lined up for there, and we heard one just before, and there was 2 rooms in the house, and we were on the side that you could hear those coming in. Artillery, believe it or not, you could hear whether it was going to even hit close to you by the whistling on the guns.
Mm-hmm.
And the very one before I got hit was really close, and everybody got up and was going to go back in the other room, and we were going through the doorway to go back in another room on the other side of the house when that one hit, and that was my end of my career. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I was wounded.
Yeah. So when that shell hit and you were wounded, what were your first thoughts when you realized that you were still alive, I guess?
The first thing was I didn't think I was going to make it, because the first thing that happened was everything was numb. My ears were ringing, and everything was, I don't know whether it was in shock or what it was, but I could feel blood running down the side of my face, and it just felt like the whole side of my face was shot away, and I was afraid to touch it. But the next step I took, my arm came up, it was so light, and I looked, no hand. It blew the hand off. And really I didn't know the hand part because I had the three stitches below my nose here, and that is where I was bleeding, and it just felt like the whole side of my face was off at first. But mostly numb.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that painful. And then there was a lieutenant in there, a second lieutenant, and there's a squad medic was there, luckily. And the squad medic went to help somebody else, because there was, out of the 12 of us down there, I think at least 11 were partially wounded. And there was one guy that was pretty serious, I believe. I'm not sure. It sounded during the night he was moaning pretty much. But anyways, the lieutenant said, let those guys over there, here's a guy that needs you more than them. And he called him over to take care of my wound. And he started dressing my wound. And he put a compact over the front of it and tried to wrap it up, but 2 of the fingers came out down here. And the lieutenant said, those are in your way. Why didn't you? He was trying to put them back in the bandage. And he said, they're in your way. Why didn't you cut them off? And the squad medic said, sir, he said, I'm only a squad medic. I can't do surgery. I can only give first aid. Well, the lieutenant said, well, in that case, I'll give you an order. Cut them off. That's an order. And I said, you might as well, because I could have gone like that.
Mm-hmm.
They were just hanging down. They were halfway down my arm.
So then, after your medic treated you, were you immediately evacuated after that, or how long did you have to wait until you were pulled off from
during
that
the night,
position?
They had a runner coming in and giving us the situation outside, how things were. He said, we can't get in to get your wounded out yet. We're surrounded. So they would be talking, and he'd come, and a couple hours later, he'd come back and talk to the fellows, and I guess the lieutenant in there, and how the situation was, and they, all night long. And then in the morning, just about daybreak, 2 guys came in with a stretcher, and they said, we can take you down to the hospital, and there we can get you evacuated with an ambulance or a jeep. As it turned out, it was a jeep. And he said, can you walk? I said, yes. He said, well, he said, we'll help you. If you can walk, you're better off than trying to carry you down there. Things are still a little hot out there. There was aircraft, not aircraft, but artillery still coming in. And they didn't trust. So that they said, and I walked from here, I would say, a city block. then we were done. That's how close we were to that. And there they put me in the vestibule there, and they had, I would say, maybe a dozen little fellows that were wounded in there already, and they put me there, and then they waited till they could get me taken out there and taken back to a field hospital. And after I was there maybe 15 minutes, and they come and they took me out to put me on the stretcher, and when they took me out, here was a Jeep with there was 2 people on there already, one across the hood at the windshield. Then they put me next to him on a rack in front of him, and then they had put one in the back across the back, and they had one more, so they went in, and they didn't come out, and they didn't come out. I said, they must have gone for a coffee break. I didn't want to get out of here because there were still shells falling, not too close, but you could hear them exploding. And so finally they came out. Now they're in a hurry. They put the last guy on. So they had 4 of us up on stretchers across the Jeep. And they're in a hurry. They went pretty fast, and they hit a bump, and my stretcher hopped off the rack, and I grabbed the other guy's stretcher and held on and hollered at him. And then he put me back on. They said, don't drive so fast. That hurts whenever you hit a bump like that. Then I could feel it. Yeah. And he said, yeah, we'll take it easy. So then he took me back to a field hospital.
So when they were driving like that, and you said you could feel it in your arm, then when you hit the bump, was that when you first really felt the pain?
That was more pain. So I was trying to hold it so it wouldn't move so much. But the numbness had been out of it, then you start feeling pain.
You mentioned to me before on your drive back, you passed one GI, maybe 2, I can't remember correctly, but you had the
2 of them,
prisoners. Yeah. Could you tell me that story?
There was a prisoner in the front of a line of a guard, one of the Americans, on the front of, I would say maybe, it could have been 8, 10 prisoners, and they were marching them in the line, and the guy in the back of them, and they stopped to say, where you're taking him? And they told him, we're taking him back to this certain place. I didn't know where we were, so they evidently knew. And the driver of the Jeep says, hop in, we'll make them SOBs run all the way. No, he said, you take your cash back, and if we're still here, when you come back, we'll take you up on that. So I don't know how they made out, but and which I was glad, because I wanted to get back into the hospital and get the treatment, because I thinking of back over the years, how lucky I was that I didn't go into shock when losing blood. No tourniquet, nothing.
Yeah.
And at the wrist is one of the worst places you can bleed.
So when you did arrive back in the hospital and they started treating you, what was that experience like, just being in the hospitals and being away from the front? And then,
well, I was just too glad to be away from the front. I said, my fighting is over, so I was glad, because I said, now I'm going to make it. Up until that time, you didn't know if you couldn't get treatment, you weren't going to make it, but now you were in the hospital. And there they put me to sleep and operated on me. And there's a piece of bone below the wrist, and they took it out there, but not enough to close the wound, so they just put in a cast and try to pull it, the skin forward to close it up a little bit, and that's all they could do. And that was in a field hospital in a tent, something like MASH, if you ever saw MASH. That reminded you exactly of that. They had and it wasn't too far behind the lines, because we made that in about, I would say, within a half hour from the time we left that hospital with the Jeep. And they had an airstrip there for planes to, and in there they put me on a plane and flew me back into Paris and waiting for a trip home.
So when you made it to Paris and you were in another medical facility, hospital, what was that like there?
There I guess that might have been a civilian hospital at one time, and I guess the Army sort of took it over. But they probably had civilians working there yet, because I know that there was a nurse there, and she come and looked at me and said, she called me baby phrase in French, but I didn't know, because I was pretty, well, at 18 years old, and I curly hair at that time, and I guess I was pretty young looking. So I guess I had showed you that picture of me over on the front page of the newspaper, and with the day that the president died. Yeah, you had a copy of that, didn't you?
Yeah, yes, you did give me a copy of that.
Yeah.
So with the news reaching home about you being wounded, and I remember you also told me about the letter that you had written by the nurse home to your mother, and then also the telegram that was beaten, like the letter beat the telegram by a day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have that letter here someplace, I think. No, that's down there. That's what they had from that down on the farm. Oh, that must be in here someplace yet. There's my separation papers.
Okay.
That's an original copy of the paper that we had made. You had seen that, and my picture was on there. Somebody out there. Yeah. There's the one that the nurse wrote. That was a telegram together.
So to skip ahead a little bit.
If that would have been the day before this come, that would have been the first of any kind of contact that they heard from me since the time I had gone over.
Yeah. So you hadn't had the opportunity to write home at all from the time you were over. And that makes sense.
I wasn't a letter writer to begin with.
That too,
And
so to skip ahead a little bit to when you were home.
Yes.
What was, I guess, your family's first reaction or your friends' first reaction when you first came home? Like how happy they were to see you and what their thoughts were in regards to receiving the letter and the telegram and seeing your picture in the paper with the article?
That's the part that I don't remember too much of
Mm-hmm.
when I came home. I remember I hitchhiked home from Lebanon. Oh, at that time you didn't even get a chance to put your thumb out if you were walking along and they saw you. Where are you going? We'll take you home,
Mm-hmm.
So you could hitchhike all over the United States and have no problem doing it. But I believe it was in the evening, and then I had to find out because they had moved they lived in Buffalo Springs, and while I was overseas, they moved in the Shaverstown area. No, that was the first time. I'm sorry. That was before I went overseas. They were in Shaverstown when I came home from a basic training.
Okay.
And I know that they were happy to see me. I was happy to see them, and
So you mentioned hitchhiking home from Lebanon. How did you get back to Lebanon from returning to the U.S.? I'm guessing did you come into New York again?
Yeah, they had a train station in Lebanon,
Mm-hmm.
and we came up from, I think I came through Reading that time. I'm not sure. Or did I come from Harrisburg into Lebanon when I came home the first time? And hitchhiked home. Yeah, I just remember hitchhiking at Grade 97 and Walnut Street. I walked out to there before I could set my duffel bag. The first guy stopped and said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Shaverstown, I'll take you there," he said. I don't know whether he was going all the way to Shaverstown or not, but they took me home.
Mm-hmm. So from taking the train home, or at least back to Lebanon, do you remember anyone else from the service being on the train, or what the train ride was like at all?
No, I don't remember too much of that. I really don't.
Okay, that's fine. So when you made it home, was that before or after VE Day?
VE Day?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They would have been afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Before, I'm sorry.
Before, okay.
Yeah. Because I'll tell you when I was home on the back porch when they had VE Day.
Mm-hmm.
That was home after I was wounded and home at that time again. So
mm-hmm.
I was on when they took me home, and when I finally landed down in Atlantic City, as I told you,
mm-hmm.
and they said, "You have to have another operation. Would you like a medical leave before? Would you like to go home? Have you been home yet?" I said, "No, not since the accident."
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, "Would you like to go home? We'll give you a 30-day convalescent leave."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, I'd love that." That's when I came home, and that's when I was on the back porch when they were ringing the bells, and Germany had give up.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been May the 11th. They actually gave up on the 3rd, I believe. Did they sign on the 11th or something? I'm not sure of those dates anymore. But
I know England recognizes VE Day as May 7th, and I think
7th,
the U.S. does the 8th. There's a couple different, and then the Russians, they recognize it as the 9th because that's when it ended. That's when each particular power officially signed on. With being home during VE Day, do you remember any celebrations going on in town?
I didn't leave the back porch,
mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't know. So at that one, the big celebration was when the Japanese gave it. There I was.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that one. I don't think they had nearly as much as they did on Japan giving up.
Mm-hmm. So from what you can recall from the celebrations on VJ Day when Japan surrendered, what do you remember going on to celebrate?
I was down in Atlantic City in the hospital, and we had Class A passes when I was down there recuperating, and I could go out daily on the boardwalk or any place I wanted to go from 8 in the morning to I think it was 11 at night. You had to be back in on a Class A pass. And when that broke out, of course, everybody went out on the boardwalk. That boardwalk was lined up. People were running down the street. Girls were coming and kissing the soldiers and hugging them, and there was a wild melee going on. And I never got back into the hotel until about 4 in the morning. And when I got back there into the hospital, of course, it was a hospital at the time, and they said there was a guard standing there, hand in your pass. You said you're losing your pass. They're taking the pass away from you. Well, the next day they gave it back to us, but of course they knew it.
So after the war had ended altogether and everyone started to come home, in December of 45, that's when the welcome home dinner was held for everyone in town. For the photos of. What do you remember from that event and the atmosphere, getting to see other guys who were just still getting home or those who'd been home for a little while, and how was it catching up with everyone, if you can remember?
Well, at that time you knew everybody that was in just about, and everybody was equal, so we were thankful for that dinner that they gave us, but other than that, I don't remember a whole lot going on that evening, except that how nice they were for it, to giving us a dinner and so forth.
And then to follow that, with, I guess, the first few months, the first few years after the war being over, for you personally and anyone else from the area just the community as a whole in regards to the people from the area who served during World War II, what was it like adjusting back into civilian life after the war was over?
Well, I don't remember too much. It was quite a while before I got a job, I believe, when I was in the hospital for quite a while. I was in the hospital until October, I believe you saw, and that's when I was released. So,
and then when you were out and were able to find work, what type of job did you have?
I believe the first job that I got was up at Palmyra in a shoe factory. There was the thing that was the toughest was for me to find a job that was paying, because you got, how many jobs is it that you don't need two hands? I couldn't be an electrician. I couldn't be a carpenter. I would have probably been in that field of some kind, or even a car mechanic, because I was hooked up quite a bit with the Keller brothers at that time. Yeah, I had friends that the Keller boys were friends out there. That's probably where I would have ended up of course, that wouldn't have been the best paying job either, but I might, unless I'd been a car salesman and could have made some money, but.
Yeah, so with being friends with the Keller brothers, do you remember before the war, after the war, during the war, while it was going on, before you were called up, like what kind of car you drove, first car, anyone who had hot cars for the time from around here?
You know, before I went into the service in 1943, they didn't make any more cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything was bare. If you
Mm-hmm.
got a car, they went up in the scrapyard and pulled one down and got it. And I think the first one I was going to buy was a 34 Ford
Mm-hmm.
that they got up and brought off the scrapyard. But they were going to scrap it. But then when cars got so scarce, they brought them down and got them running again. But then somebody else bought that one, and I bought a 1937 Ford, 60 horsepower, which is most of them were 85 horsepower at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and they had one that was a 60 horsepower,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't have any pep or anything.
Yeah.
And that's what I had until I came home. Then, of course, I got on a list for a new one.
Mm-hmm.
We went down to they had a truck strike at one time, and they had to pick up the dealers had to pick up their car down at Chester. They had a Ford Motor Company plant down in Chester where they made cars. And we went down there one day to pick them up, and one of the killer boys took me into to the manager in there and said, "Could you do anything for this veteran?
Mm-hmm.
He's a disabled veteran." And then he asked me whether I was on the list to any place. I said, "Yes, I'm on the list at Fryestown." And then he said, "You'll call him and see whether, and I'm going to give him an extra unit that day. At that point, if he was getting one car a month
Mm-hmm.
to sell out there, he was lucky because he was a small dealer." And he said, "I'm going to send you 2 cars, and this one is for," and he told him my name, and it didn't suit him, the fellow at Fryestown too much. He was very unhappy. He said, "He has other guys on the list that were ahead of me."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well," he said, "I'm going to give you an extra unit." So he put my name on the invoice when he came in,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't happy with me. He asked, at the time we went to pick it up, he asked me how I want to pay that. I said, "Well, I have $600, and it was $1,100 for the new
Mm-hmm.
car, and I'll finance." "Nope. If you don't want it, I'll give it to somebody else." I said, "We'll get it. I'll be back." So the killer boy was along with me. He went back into his dad, and he gave me a check for that to take out.
Wow.
Keller boss gave me a check to give out to the guy in Fryestown, and I got my car. But yeah, no, there was no cars to be had.
Mm-hmm.
New cars. I remember Keller's might have had 1 or 2 1943s. That's the year they stopped making them, and then started going into production for military vehicles. And there was maybe 1 or 2, and the only ones that they could sell it to was a doctor or somebody important, and they sold it, I think, to a veterinarian up in Lebanon.
So with wartime rationing and cars not being produced, and what else was noticeable like in town during the war, but before you left for your service? Like any shortages of certain items, like fuel,
The
tires.
main thing was gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
Was rationed. I got what they called the lowest one because I didn't have any kind of profession that I needed a lot of driving or so, and I had what they call an A sticker,
Mm-hmm.
and you might have got 15 gallons a month or something like that. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you the exact. It wasn't much. The farmers got a ration where they could get all they needed
Mm-hmm.
because they felt they were feeding the troops. And if you worked in a factory or something that was producing equipment for the Army or Navy,
Mm-hmm.
then you had to travel. You could get a little bit more you had to state your case when you went to get the coupons.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar was another thing that was rationed, I remember. That was one of the things that seemed to hurt the most.
Mm-hmm.
And beef, I don't know how that was rationed, but that was rationed also. You couldn't get as much beef as you.
So with these things being rationed, and then also, I guess my next question would be during that time before you'd left, I guess like kind of like the war effort movement. You mentioned your school doing scrap drives or scrap tin cans, things like that, and also promoting war bonds. What else was going on in town? Were there any like anything for the Red Cross, anything like that?
My wife was, she was in school, and up on the carnival grounds, the stands there, like the blanket stands and the wheel stands, they had set up there, and they put shifts up there that would go up there and watch for airplanes to go across. And when an airplane went across, they had to call in someplace and tell them airplane going east to west over Shaverstown or something. And they would look at their schedules and say, yeah, this airline was scheduled for that. That's okay. It's not an enemy. So she got involved in it too. Plus, even when I was there's the afternoons that they'd give us off to go up to a potato farm and pick potatoes for the farmer because he couldn't get help to get his crops in.
So, while you were still at home before you left too, receiving news about the war, what do you think you used the most, or what do you think informed you the most? Was it by newspaper or by radio that you think you got most of your information from about
Probably
stuff?
Probably radio, I would think. And I guess every night you'd read the newspaper, you want to know how the troops were making out. They kept up pretty good with the news where different troops were, and they won another battle here or there, whatever,
Yeah.
So I would have known by that.
Yeah. And then do you also, from that time, I know one of the things that was done is they would show newsreels before movies. Do you remember seeing any of those in movie theater, or?
I don't remember too much of it, but yes, they used to have newsreels before a movie would start.
Is there anything else that you can think of that I hadn't asked that you'd like to add? I'm going to double check my list again here.
No, I can't really think too much.
Okay, the last question I had here then is just kind of to wrap everything up. Either from your personal experience, or just for what you think overall for the whole history of the war, what do you think is the most important thing, or what do you think that people from like my generation who weren't there for it should remember and care about the most? Like, what do you think is the most important thing to come out of it?
That's a tough question. I really don't know. I mean, what to say on that. I think going back over the war, the people that study and are interested in the war, like yourself especially, know more about the war than I did. Really, yeah. I knew I was drafted. I went in and I fought and I came home, and that's the beginning and the end. And in between things you remember, like we talked about, of course, and I'll let you know. But other things there's so much that I forgot about too.
Yeah.
And I'll never remember what I did at a certain time. So.
Yeah. And that's one of those things too. It's like at times it's like you're just going through your life and there's things that like when you experience them they were going to matter to you for a while. There's other stuff it's right. Just another day and it doesn't stick with you as much. Right. So yeah.
One of my things, and I might have talked to you the last time about this, was remembering going across a secret line. How you walk between those concrete pillars. Yeah. And it was early morning, a little before daybreak, and the objective was there was maybe 300-400 yards across. There was a little town, and that was our objective, to go and take that town. Well, when they decided, we were all lined up behind the Siegfried line, and they said, "Let's go." And they sent the guy out. The first guy was a Scot. The first Scot. They put them up in front, and they went out, and he stepped on a landmine and blew part of his foot off. Well, then they said, "Okay, the second Scot, take off, get out there." And he said, "I'm not going out there." And like I say, our squad sergeant, our platoon sergeant probably, he was a gung-ho guy, and he turned the rifle on the guy and says, "Get out there." About 6-7 rifles turned up on the sergeant. He said, "I wouldn't do that if I was you." And he started crying and said, "Well, somebody got to go out there." Jeez. And my foxhole buddy said, "Russ and I'll go out there." I said, "You don't know what you're talking about." Then he said, "Russ, that's a promotion for you. Second Scot, first Scot is a corporal. You have to be at least a PFC, and it's an automatic PFC if you take second Scot. I'll take first Scot." I said, "Okay." So, of course, he went out, and there was snow there, and I just stepped in every footstep that he made. If he made it, I knew I was going to make it too, and we got through all right. But I never got promoted.
You never got the promotion through.
In fact, like I was saying, my foxhole buddy, about 2 weeks before I got wounded, he got wounded and sent back, and that pushed me up automatic to first Scot, which would have been corporal. I never got that either. So, and there's no way of proving that when you don't know anybody and can't go back into records and stuff.
Yeah, and
I didn't even have my first Scot anymore to know how to get a hold of him to start paperwork. Sometimes you can catch up with people that can verify stuff for you.
Yeah, and that's the thing too.
It wasn't worth it. So
yeah, and if that platoon sergeant hadn't put anything in, and then the lieutenant above him never bothered to do anything,
they never knew that. That word of mouth even never left that day.
Yeah, and that might be one of those things that they didn't even want to talk about. That the sergeant had to point a gun at someone, and everyone turned on him. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's everything that I could think of to ask you, but I can shut this off now, and then we can just talk normally, because I have some stuff I wanted to show you, and I was wondering if I could take some pictures of some of the stuff that you had, because I remember I borrowed your service portrait and then a copy of the that town like the welcome home dinner photo, but I saw another photo in there and some other things that I don't think you had out the last time I was here. I'd really like to see those too.
Okay. So, get this guy. That's what you look like.